1992, the Bodyguard film set. Director Mick Jackson had just called action for what was supposed to be the movie's most romantic scene. Whitney Houston and Kevin Costner stood inches apart, their faces lit by soft, romantic lighting. 150 crew members watching in complete silence, cameras rolling at 24 frames per second. The script called for a passionate kiss that would seal their on-screen love story and give audiences the romantic payoff they were expecting. But then Kevin Costner did something that shocked everyone on that soundstage. He stopped the scene, stepped back from Whitney, and told the director in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "We're not doing this. We're not kissing." What happened next didn't just change one of the most iconic films of the 1990s. It proved that sometimes the deepest love is shown not through passion, but through protection. And the decision Kevin made in that moment would affect both of their lives in ways nobody could have predicted. To understand the magnitude of what Kevin Costner did that day on the Bodyguard set, you need to understand what was at stake. This wasn't just another Hollywood production. This was a film that had been in development hell for nearly 16 years, a project that had been rejected by every major studio, a script that nobody believed could work. The story of a professional bodyguard falling in love with a pop superstar he's been hired to protect had originally been written in 1976 for Steve McQueen and Diana Ross. But McQueen died before the film could be made, and the project sat on shelves gathering dust for over a decade. By 1991, Kevin Costner was at the absolute peak of his career. He had just won the Academy Award for Best Director for Dances with Wolves, a film that had earned over $400 million worldwide and won 7 Oscars. He was Hollywood's golden boy, the actor who could get any project greenlit with a single phone call. When he decided to revive The Bodyguard, every studio in town wanted to be involved. But Kevin had one non-negotiable demand that would change everything. Whitney Houston had to play the female lead. The idea seemed insane to almost everyone in Hollywood. Whitney was undeniably one of the biggest music stars in the world. Her voice was legendary, her records sold in the millions, and her face was recognized globally. But she had never acted in a major motion picture. She had no formal training, no experience carrying a film, and no proven track record in cinema. When Kevin insisted that Whitney was the only person who could play Rachel Marron, the studio executives thought he had lost his mind. "Kevin, she's a singer, not an actress," one Paramount executive told him during a tense meeting in early 1991. "This is a $25 million film. We can't risk it on someone who's never done this before." But Kevin wouldn't budge. He had seen something in Whitney that nobody else had noticed. He had watched her perform at the 1991 Grammy Awards, singing "All the Man That I Need" with such emotional depth and vulnerability that he was moved to tears. In that moment, he realized that Whitney Houston wasn't just a voice. She was Rachel Marron. She had the strength, the vulnerability, the presence, and the authenticity that the role demanded. What followed was an 8-month battle between Kevin and the studio. They offered him Michelle Pfeiffer. He said no. They suggested Julia Roberts. He refused. They even proposed Madonna, who had some acting experience. Kevin rejected every name they presented. "Whitney Houston or nobody," he told them repeatedly. "If you won't cast her, I won't do the film." It was the biggest gamble of his career, risking his reputation and his clout for a woman he barely knew, based purely on his instinct that she was right for the role. Finally, in November 1991, Paramount reluctantly agreed, but they attached conditions. The budget would be kept relatively low. Kevin would have to take a pay cut, and if the film failed, the blame would fall entirely on his shoulders. Kevin accepted every condition without hesitation. He believed in Whitney that much. But what Kevin didn't fully understand yet was just how terrified Whitney was of the whole situation. Whitney Houston had conquered the music world, but the idea of leading a major Hollywood film absolutely terrified her. In the weeks before filming began, she barely slept. She had nightmares about forgetting her lines, about being exposed as a fraud, about proving all the doubters right. Her mother, Cissy Houston, who had taught her everything about singing, couldn't help her with this. Acting was a completely different skill set, and Whitney felt utterly unprepared. "I remember the first day of rehearsals," recalled Mick Jackson, the Bodyguard's director. "Whitney walked in looking absolutely petrified. She was trying to hide it behind her usual confidence, but you could see it in her eyes. She was scared to death. The rehearsal period was particularly challenging for Whitney. While Kevin moved through scenes with the ease of a seasoned actor, Whitney struggled with the basics. She didn't know where to look when the camera wasn't on her. She didn't understand how to hit her marks. She moved too much, then not enough. Every instinct she had from performing on stage seemed wrong for film acting. Kevin noticed her struggle immediately and took it upon himself to become her acting coach. Every evening after the official rehearsals ended, he would stay late with Whitney, walking her through scenes over and over. "Don't perform," he would tell her gently. "Don't try to be big. The camera sees everything. Just be real. Just be you." These private coaching sessions created an extraordinary bond between them. Whitney began to trust Kevin in a way she had never trusted anyone outside her family. He wasn't trying to change her or mold her into something she wasn't. He was simply helping her find the truth in the character by finding the truth in herself. But as filming approached, there was one scene that terrified Whitney more than all the others combined: the love scene. According to the original script, there was a moment late in the film where Frank Farmer, Kevin's character, and Rachel Marin would finally give in to their mutual attraction and share a passionate kiss. The scene was crucial to the story's romantic arc, the moment audiences would be waiting for throughout the entire film. And Whitney was absolutely dreading it. The reasons for her anxiety were complex and deeply personal. Part of it was simple inexperience. She had never filmed an intimate scene before and had no idea how to make it look real without it being real. Part of it was awareness of the racial dynamics at play. In 1992, America was still deeply uncomfortable with interracial romance on screen. Whitney knew that her relationship with Kevin's character would be scrutinized, criticized, and politicized in ways that had nothing to do with the quality of their performances. But there was something else, something Whitney confided only to her closest friends. She was afraid that the kiss would define her in Hollywood's eyes. She would become the black actress who kissed the white leading man, reduced to a racial talking point rather than being recognized for her acting talent. She wanted to be taken seriously as an actress, not turned into a symbol or a statement about race relations. The pressure was enormous, and as filming progressed, Whitney's anxiety about the kissing scene grew worse. Kevin Costner was oblivious to Whitney's internal struggle for the first few weeks of production. He was focused on his own performance, on making sure the film stayed on schedule and on budget, on managing the complex logistics of a major Hollywood production. But slowly, he began to notice something was wrong. Whitney's performances in the early scenes were good, sometimes even great. But whenever they rehearsed anything that involved physical intimacy, even just standing close together, he could feel her entire body tense up. One evening, after a particularly difficult rehearsal, Kevin asked Whitney to stay late. The crew had left, the soundstage was empty, and it was just the two of them in the dimly lit space where they had been filming. "Talk to me," Kevin said gently. "Something's bothering you about this, and I need to know what it is." Whitney tried to deflect at first, insisting everything was fine. But Kevin persisted. "Whitney, I can feel it. Every time we get close, you pull away. Not physically, but emotionally. I need to know why." What followed was one of the most honest conversations either of them had ever had with a co-star. Whitney told Kevin everything. Her fear of being reduced to a racial symbol. Her anxiety about the interracial kiss becoming the only thing people talked about. Her desire to be seen as an actress, not as a statement. Her terror that one scene would overshadow everything else about her performance. Kevin listened without interrupting, and as Whitney spoke, something shifted in his understanding of the entire film. "I had been thinking about the movie from my perspective," Kevin later admitted in a rare interview about the experience. "I was focused on making a great thriller, a romantic story, a film that would entertain audiences. But I hadn't fully considered what it meant for Whitney to be the first black woman to lead a romantic thriller opposite a white male star. The weight of that representation, the scrutiny she would face, the way every choice would be analyzed through a racial lens. I had been naive about what I was asking her to do." That conversation changed everything for Kevin. He went home that night and watched the film's rushes, the raw footage they had shot so far. And he realized something profound. The best scenes between Frank and Rachel weren't the ones where they were touching. They were the scenes where they were looking at each other. The moment in the car when Frank glances at Rachel in the rearview mirror. The scene in the hotel hallway when their eyes meet across the distance. The quiet instant when Rachel watches Frank check the windows before she goes to sleep. These looks communicated more depth, more longing, more genuine connection than any physical contact could. Kevin began to formulate a radical idea. What if they didn't kiss at all? What if the entire romantic arc of the film was built on looks, on proximity, on the tension of what wasn't happening rather than what was? It would be unprecedented for a Hollywood romantic thriller. Audiences expected the kiss, anticipated it, would feel cheated without it. But what if the absence of a kiss could be even more powerful than its presence? What if restraint could be more romantic than passion? The kissing scene was scheduled for a Tuesday in March 1992. Everyone on set knew this was the big day. The crew had been talking about it for weeks. The scene was set in Rachel's mansion, in a quiet moment after Frank has saved her from an assassination attempt. Rachel, overwhelmed with gratitude and emotion, would finally break through Frank's professional barriers and kiss him. It was supposed to be the emotional climax of their relationship, the moment when professional duty surrendered to personal feeling. The set was dressed beautifully. Soft lighting created an intimate atmosphere. The camera angles had been carefully planned to make the moment as romantic as possible. Whitney had been in hair and makeup for hours, looking absolutely stunning. Kevin arrived on set early, but he seemed distracted, distant. Mick Jackson noticed, but assumed Kevin was just getting into character, preparing for an emotionally demanding scene. What nobody knew was that Kevin had been up all night, thinking about his conversation with Whitney, reviewing the footage they had shot, and making one of the biggest decisions of his career. He had decided they weren't going to film the kiss. But he hadn't told anyone yet, not the director, not the studio, and not even Whitney herself. He was about to blow up the entire production schedule based purely on his belief that he was right. "Okay, everyone ready?" Mick Jackson called out. "This is the big moment, let's make it count." The crew fell silent. Whitney took her position, her hands slightly shaking. Kevin walked to his mark, standing just inches from her. The camera operator signaled ready. Mick raised his hand to call action, and that's when Kevin stopped everything. "Mick, can I talk to you for a second?" Kevin said, his voice calm but firm. "Before we shoot this." The director looked confused but walked over to Kevin. They spoke in low voices for a moment, then Mick's face registered shock. "You want a what?" he said, loud enough that the nearby crew members could hear. "Kevin, this is a romantic film. The audience expects a kiss. We can't just not have one." But Kevin was adamant. "We don't need it, Mick. Actually, the film is better without it. Trust me on this." What followed was a tense 20-minute discussion that would determine the entire future of the film. Mick argued that Paramount would never approve such a major script change. Kevin countered that Paramount had hired him because they trusted his instincts, and his instinct told him the kiss was wrong for the film. Mick pointed out that romantic thrillers always culminated in a kiss or more. Kevin responded that maybe it was time to do something different, something that respected the intelligence of the audience. But the conversation wasn't just about artistic choices. It was about something deeper, something Kevin was struggling to articulate. "Mick," he finally said, "I need to protect Whitney, not as Frank protecting Rachel, but as me protecting her. If we do this kiss, it becomes the only thing anyone talks about." The interracial kiss that shocked America, the controversy, the racial politics. Whitney's performance gets lost in all of that. But if we don't kiss, if we show love in a different way, the focus stays on her acting, on the film itself, on the story we're trying to tell. Mick Jackson stood silent for a long moment, processing what Kevin was really saying. This wasn't just about a single scene. This was about using Kevin's power and privilege in Hollywood to protect a Black woman artist from being reduced to a racial symbol. It was about recognizing that what might be just another romantic scene for a white actress carried completely different weight and consequences for Whitney Houston. Kevin walked over to Whitney, who had been watching the intense discussion between actor and director with growing anxiety. "Can we talk?" he asked her quietly. They walked to a corner of the set, away from the crew's ears. "Whitney," Kevin said, looking directly into her eyes, "I know you're scared about this scene. And I've been thinking about what you told me about not wanting to be reduced to just the kiss, about wanting to be seen as an actress. I have a proposal, and I need you to be completely honest with me about what you think." "What kind of proposal?" Whitney asked, her voice cautious. "What if we don't kiss?" Kevin said simply. Whitney's eyes widened in surprise. What do you mean we don't kiss? Kevin, it's in the script. The studio expects it. The audience expects it. But Kevin was already shaking his head. Forget what everyone expects. I'm asking what you want. Do you want to do this scene? Whitney was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. No, she whispered. I don't want to do it. I'm terrified of what it means, of how people will talk about it, of becoming just the black girl who kissed Kevin Costner instead of being recognized for my actual acting. But I thought I had to. I thought it was part of the job. Kevin took her hand. You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with, and more importantly, the film doesn't need it. I've been watching our footage, and Whitney, the way you look at me in those scenes, that's more powerful than any kiss could ever be. What Kevin said next would stay with Whitney for the rest of her life. I want to protect you, he told her. Not just in this movie as Frank Farmer, but in real life. I have power in this industry that you're just starting to navigate. I can take the heat for this decision. I can tell the studio it was my choice, my creative vision. You don't have to be the one who refused to kiss the white leading man. I can be the one who decided the film didn't need it. Let me use my privilege to protect you from becoming a symbol, instead of being seen as the incredible actress you are. Whitney started crying, but they were tears of relief, not sadness. For the first time since signing on to do the film, she felt like someone truly understood the impossible position she was in. Kevin wasn't just thinking about the movie's box office or his own performance. He was thinking about her career, her dignity, her right to be seen as more than a racial statement. Are you sure? Whitney asked. You're risking so much for this. The studio might fire you. The film might fail without the kiss. Kevin smiled. Whitney, I won the Oscar for Best Director. I have credibility in this town. If I say we're doing it this way, they'll listen. And if the film fails, which it won't, I'll take full responsibility. But I truly believe that what we're going to create instead of that kiss will be more powerful, more memorable, and more respectful of both of us and the audience. He paused, then added, besides, some of the greatest love stories ever told didn't need a kiss to prove the love was real. Sometimes a look says everything. Once Kevin and Whitney had agreed, they had to convince Mick Jackson and the studio executives. The conversation with Mick was easier than expected. The director had been watching the dynamic between his two leads, and he had to admit Kevin had a point. The chemistry between them was palpable in scenes where they simply looked at each other. Mick agreed to try it Kevin's way, though he insisted they shoot the kiss as a backup. Kevin agreed, knowing he had no intention of using it. The studio was furious. We're making a romantic thriller, one executive shouted. How can you have a romantic thriller where the leads don't kiss? But Kevin stood firm. He explained his vision. Instead of a kiss, they would create a moment of such intense emotional closeness that the audience would feel the connection even more deeply. Kevin proposed replacing the kiss with something more intimate. A scene where Frank and Rachel stand facing each other, so close they're breathing the same air, their eyes locked, the tension almost unbearable. Frank would raise his hand as if to touch Rachel's face, get within millimeters of her skin, and then stop. Pull back. The pain of that restraint, Kevin argued, would be more powerful than any kiss. The studio reluctantly agreed to let Kevin shoot it his way, insisting on the kiss version as backup. When the day came to shoot the new version, something magical happened. You could see every emotion on both their faces. Desire, longing, duty, sacrifice. Kevin's hand trembled as he raised it toward Whitney's face, got so close you could see the heat between his palm and her cheek, and then slowly pulled away. Whitney's eyes showed both disappointment and understanding. When Mick called cut, there was absolute silence for 3 full seconds. Then the entire crew burst into spontaneous applause. That, Mick said quietly, is one of the most romantic things I've ever filmed. The kiss version was shot later as a formality. It was fine, but it lacked the raw emotional power of the almost touch. When reviewed in post-production, the decision was unanimous. The near miss was infinitely more powerful. Kevin had been right. This wasn't just about one scene in one movie. What Kevin did that day spoke to something much larger about power, privilege, and protection in Hollywood. Kevin was at the peak of his career, a white male actor with an Oscar and complete creative control. He could have kissed Whitney on screen without facing any professional consequences. In fact, it probably would have helped his image. But Kevin understood something crucial. Just because he wouldn't face consequences didn't mean Whitney wouldn't. For him, it would be just another romantic scene. For Whitney, it would become a defining moment that she would be asked about in every interview for the rest of her life. Kevin chose to use his privilege not to benefit himself, but to protect someone with less power in that particular context. This decision reflected the core theme of The Bodyguard itself. Frank Farmer's entire character is built around protection, putting someone else's safety above his own desires. By choosing not to kiss Whitney, Kevin was essentially living out his character's philosophy in real life. He was being Frank Farmer, not just playing him. In interviews years later, Whitney spoke about this decision with deep gratitude. Kevin saw me as a full human being, not just as a black woman or a pop star trying to act, she told Oprah in 1996. He understood that what might be easy for him could be devastating for me, and he cared more about my dignity and my career than he cared about a single scene. That's real protection. That's the kind of love that says, I see you, I understand what you're facing, and I'm going to use whatever power I have to make your path a little easier. The irony is that by not kissing, Kevin and Whitney created one of the most memorable romantic dynamics in 1990s cinema. Audiences didn't feel cheated. They felt moved by the restraint, by the love that was so strong it demanded self-denial for a greater purpose. The film became a massive success, earning over $400 million worldwide and making Whitney a legitimate movie star, not just a singer who tried acting. The Bodyguard's success proved something revolutionary. You could have a romantic thriller with a black female lead and a white male lead without reducing their relationship to the politics of race. By avoiding the kiss, Kevin and Whitney actually transcended the racial dynamics that would have otherwise dominated the conversation. Critics and audiences talked about their chemistry, their performances, and the film's story, not about the interracial romance controversy that everyone had predicted. This opened doors for other black actresses in Hollywood. After Whitney's success, studios became more willing to cast black women in romantic lead roles. It wasn't a complete revolution. Hollywood still had deep-seated racism to address, but it was a significant step forward. And that step happened partly because Kevin chose to protect Whitney's dignity over following conventional romantic movie formulas. Kevin and Whitney remained close for the rest of her life. When Whitney struggled with addiction in the 2000s, Kevin was one of the few Hollywood figures who reached out privately, offering support without judgment. And when Whitney died in 2012, Kevin's eulogy at her funeral was one of the most emotional tributes, because their connection went deeper than just co-stars. Kevin spoke at Whitney's funeral for 17 minutes, barely getting through his words without breaking down. I wanted to protect you, he said, his voice cracking. In the movie, I succeeded. Frank kept Rachel safe, but in real life, I couldn't do enough. That day on set when I said we shouldn't kiss, Whitney was willing to do it because she thought it was what the movie needed. But I told her, protecting her mattered more than any scene, any box office, any Hollywood expectation. Sometimes love isn't about the kiss. Sometimes love is about knowing when not to kiss, when to let someone be seen for who they really are. The story of the kiss that never happened is ultimately about seeing people fully, about recognizing that our choices affect others differently based on their identity and social position, and about using privilege to protect rather than exploit. Kevin didn't have to think about how a kiss would affect his career. Whitney had to think about little else. That asymmetry of consequence is what made Kevin's decision so significant. In a Hollywood built on exploitation, Kevin chose a different path. He chose to see Whitney as a complete human being deserving of respect. He chose to use his power to make her path easier rather than making his own path more lucrative. And in doing so, he created something far more valuable than a box office hit. He created a model for how people with privilege can be true allies. The film resonates with audiences decades later because of the emotional truth at its core. Two people who love each other choosing duty over desire. A protector who understands that real protection means safeguarding someone's dignity, not just their physical safety. And underneath it all, the real-life story of Kevin using his privilege to protect Whitney from being reduced to a symbol, allowing her to be seen for the talented actress she truly was. When you watch The Bodyguard now, knowing this backstory, those moments between Frank and Rachel take on additional depth. Every look, every near touch, every moment of restraint represents not just the character's choices, but Kevin and Whitney's real decision to prioritize Whitney's dignity over Hollywood conventions. The kiss that never happened became more famous than most kisses that did. It became a testament to the power of restraint and the importance of protection. Kevin and Whitney proved that sometimes the most romantic choice is the one that says, I care about you too much to reduce you to a moment. I see you as a whole person, and I'm going to protect that wholeness. That's the real story of The Bodyguard. Not just a thriller about a singer and her protector, but a real-life story about protection, respect, and the revolutionary act of seeing someone fully. Kevin didn't just play a bodyguard. He was one, protecting Whitney from an industry that would have gladly reduced her to a racial talking point. And Whitney didn't just play a strong woman. She was one, brave enough to trust Kevin's instincts and do something unprecedented. The legacy lives on every time someone watches the film and feels the electricity between two people who never kiss, but whose love is undeniable. It lives on in the careers of Black actresses who followed Whitney, who had slightly easier paths because she proved a Black woman could lead a romantic thriller. And it lives on in the example Kevin set for how privilege can be used not for personal benefit, but to protect and elevate those with less power. Sometimes the greatest love stories are about the kiss that never was. Sometimes protection means saying no to what's expected. And sometimes being a true bodyguard means protecting someone's dignity and their right to be seen as fully human. Kevin Costner understood that. Whitney Houston trusted that. And together, they created something that transcended typical Hollywood romance to become something far more meaningful. A testament to respect, protection, and the power of putting someone else's well-being ahead of conventional expectations.